Housekeeping rules before we start. Make sure you appear on Microsoft Teams with the same first last name used for registration. This in order to acquire your CIPP-E points. Presentation will be recorded, I heard, and it will be available along with the slides after the session. Please mute your microphone and stop sharing video camera during the session. And for questions, you can use raise the hand feature, but even better, type it in the chat box. Somebody will have a look, and presenters have no problem tonight with discussing questions as the moment they are raised. Then for next week, February 17, looking forward to that, but there is a different time next week. We start at 6, not at 7 like normal, so beware. And title of the session next week is "Oh, my supplier did not deliver. How to build resilience in supply chain." Speaker will be Sunil Bakshi. Then for tonight, 2 speakers. I'm one. We will see to that. It's Gilbert van Zeijl and Nico van Rooyen. And this is the agenda. I'm going straight into the speakers. I'm Gilbert van Zeijl, speaker but also host for Square Table, working as certified security privacy officer in different small medium enterprises. I'm doing this part-time for about 6 at the same time at the moment. I'm more than 25 years in IT, more than 20 years in healthcare, and information quality and security, privacy, risk management, and IT auditing are my specialties. Then Nico van Rooyen will introduce himself.
And I am Nico van Rooyen. I'm also one of the members assisting with the Square Tables. I'll also be the second speaker for tonight. On my bio, I am CISM certified, CISA certified, and CEH certified. I've been working in privacy and security for over 8 years, mainly focusing on ISO 27001 and regulatory audit compliance. My main industries that I've been working on is online gambling, e-commerce, and of course SMEs. And that's me. Thank you, Gilbert, and you can start.
Okay, I will take it over from here. Okay, then let's first look into small medium enterprises, some numbers and parameters, how they look in the Netherlands. So, okay, I looked in the numbers for statistic office, and in the Netherlands, 70% of employed persons are working in SME companies, organizations. There's more than 1,000 billion euro yearly revenue together. It makes up quite something. In the total for the Dutch economy, they make 60% of added value, and as we've seen, 70% of the employment. And how many organizations are there? That's almost 2 million SME companies, 1.92. Then looking to size, I found something from 2015. Most, and this is special for the Dutch economy. There are really a lot of companies registered with only 1 person, and something larger that is that's in different amounts, but especially the 1 person companies are very special. There are a lot of numbers in the Netherlands. Then, what is the definition for small medium enterprises? They look at micro organizations, less than 10 employees, less than 700k yearly revenue. Small, less than 50 employees, less than 12 million yearly revenue, and medium, less than 250 employees and less than 40 million yearly revenue. My customers I help are really in the micro and small segments. I have only one customer who could see that it's a medium-sized one. Then, examples. Okay, working with small medium enterprises, I do that now for 8 years as an independent consultant. I have my one-person business, and I'm using mostly Atlassian. One of my first customers was a software company. They used Atlassian, Jira, and Confluence, and developed an ISMS, and do that now for many others. Now, looking then at ISO high-level structure and how to do that. Small medium enterprises are, of course, not very complex from organization level, and that means that you can adapt the requirements from the ISO 27001 to a simpler format, which is also the challenge working with SME. Nico will go into that later a bit more. Then key of my way of dealing with SME and ISO 27001 is business canvas. Business canvas is at the heart of everything I do with management together. So the first is the context description of organization. I'm just using one A4 business canvas. I don't know if everybody is knowledgeable about that, but there's really a lot of references on internet about business canvas. It's primarily used to develop companies and to change the proposition of companies, but you can also use it to describe a company, and I'm using it for describing context. And one of the pros I have that I'm talking with this same language as management. Mostly I'm on the table with the director owner of the SME company, and he is understanding that this is the heart he is thinking, and so that's really a pro, and it's not very difficult to go from this to stakeholder analysis, like looking into the key partners and key resources when it's about stakeholders and of course the customers. And I also take it, and that's next slide I think, to the risk. Our risk will come later. Then planning, support and operation. In my SMS, I'm using a Kanban board. I use mostly then Jira software. I'm used to that, but you can do this also in SharePoint. You can do it in many other types of software that do this. And doing implementation, you see a lot of tickets, of course, and tasks that are implementation tasks for ISO. Mostly a lot of documenting. Small medium enterprises excel in doing a lot of things, but don't excel in documenting the way they work. So mostly they give really good product, but they have some problems with documenting the basics of how they do it, and also then having the quality system behind it. And later on, after certification or when ISMS is really ready, you see more tasks that are recurring. I've put some example tasks like management evaluation, incident evaluation, the supplier evaluation. We are recurring yearly or even more often. And of course, you can also have improvement points that come from management evaluation or from incidents or from external audits, internal audits. Wherever improvement points come from, they land here on the Kanban board, my improvement board. And with this, we keep good track of all tasks, and on back, it is immediately documented. So the moment an external auditor comes along, it's very simple to show what you are doing and how you did it. And also about the timeliness of everything. Then going further to risk management. Now, risk management, the external auditors and also known to most people, management involvement is a big thing, and which is also most difficult, how to get my management involved. Now, I already told you, I showed you, I'm using Business Canvas, and with that I have the same frequency of talking. I have the same language of talking as the management. So also risk management I base on Business Canvas. What we talk is then also business risk. So it means that making business value of this type of work is much more easier. It's relevant where we talk about. I show you also how I can mitigate measures and how to, because they are coming on the improvement board we just had a look at, and I have also ways of feedback of status of measures in the risk matrix. I'll show you shortly. Then going on to the examples. Here you see more or less one of the control templates I make in Confluence. It's the documentation environment of Atlassian. You see the business canvas above and the risk matrix below, and the risk matrix addresses the parts of the business canvas. You can see the first risk is on key activities, and it's in development, and this is an example of software developers. Quality of software is always an issue in every software company I work with, and mostly it's even everything, all measures we do, it's still a high risk, and all rework is bleeding profit margin, and that's therefore it's something to stay working on. Later on, you see also that we have defined some measures, specific tasks, E7 and in E10, implementing a software security baseline, which is already done, and the automatic software testing is still on the to-do list of the improvement board. In this way, we can see straight what is the status of all the work we do for mitigating measures. Then, looking to all the measures from the Annex A of the ISO 27001, I'm used to keep them away from the work floor. I'm building an index I use immediately also as internal audit framework. You can see how it works. It lists the controls. Every control has an own page, but it's the way of Confluence can work. It can query pages if you structure it, but that's the details of how it works. If somebody is interested how to do that, I can explain easily, but make then a personal note to me. What you can see is here the oversight, and on one side the control, and on the other side the policy links, like how it is solved internally. So it's making a reference between the internal policies and guidelines, how they work in this company, and the Annex A, so that the people on the work floor are not, say, annoyed with this awful text they don't understand at all. That's my task, and as a security officer. I also add the compliance status. I can add the audit date and improvement points, and a lot of more fields that I can add in other listings. But this is the main I use also with the management in reports. And just some examples in how to build an ISMS with Atlassian tools, and how to keep it very simple and distill the essence of ISO for a small and medium enterprise. Then I give over the presentation to Nico.
Before we start with our second example of ISMS implementation, is there any questions thus far? Okay, looks like nothing, so then I'll continue. So what I'll be doing is giving you guys a second example of ISMS. Oh, wait, sorry, there was one. Was that by accident?
One raised hand?
Yes, it was by accident, sorry.
Oh, nope, that's perfectly fine, it happens. So I'll then go into the second example. I'm going to talk about ISMS implementation using Office 365. The main focus of this will be to give practical examples of how to implement Annex A of ISO 27001. So I'm not going to focus on any management involvement or anything like that. And as mentioned, everything that you guys see now will be built from one of the Office 365 tools. So on the next slide, before we start, there's a few important things that everyone has to know when working with SMEs. There's of course the good, the bad, and the ugly truth. Let's start with the good. SMEs have limited bureaucracy, few decision makers, fast adapting and ever-changing organizational culture, and major contributions by few people. The bad, we struggle with limited resources with regards to manpower and funding. There's a big dependency on key resources. Projects lose momentum. What we mean with that is sometimes projects get started but never actually finished. Expect more, pay less attitude. This is always a difficult one to explain, but essentially they want the world but pay for a lot less. So essentially they want a Ferrari but they want to pay for a Volkswagen. And SMEs also struggle with limited to no accountability when it comes to controls. And then of course, what is the ugly truth about SMEs? With SMEs, there's sometimes more systems than employees. The first organization I did an ISMS implementation for was less than 110 people, and they had over 180 systems running. The second organization was less than 500 employees, and they had close to 250 systems. So if you compare that to big organizations, there's a big difference between the amount of systems and the amount of people. Also, a reality is a lot of times outsourcing is cost effective. And with what we mean with that is if one key person resigns, the cost of allocation of a new person to replace sometimes outweigh the cost of outsourcing the control from the start. And of course, limited skill in-house. Working with SMEs, you don't have a lot of staff members at your disposals, and sometimes you simply just don't have the key people to manage your controls effectively. So on the next slide, we can look at what do you actually need to know before you start your ISMS for an SME. First of all, very important, your ISMS should be part of your organizational strategy, or your ISMS should enable your organizational strategy. Nothing more, nothing less. You also need to keep track of, we refer to it as a cost per control. This can be either financial or, of course, hours. This is where we keep track of how much time and money is spent in order to make a failing control effective. You also need to have a look at the impact of your ISMS on your way of working. Generally, for SMEs, we want to keep this at a minimum. So we want to find a way to implement our ISMS without actually taking a lot away from the organizational culture. And the last thing that you definitely need to know is what tools and skills are at your disposals. Generally, SMEs already have tools in place. In my case, Office 365. In Gilbert's case, Jira. And you have to make the best of those tools. So where do we actually start then? First of all, we always integrate our effective controls first. That's simple. It's controls that are already working, so it's an easy one. Second of all, we integrate our low-hanging fruit. Those are controls that doesn't take a lot of time to implement and is generally cost effective. Thirdly, we integrate a full or a limited audit scope. Generally, our audit scope for SMEs is less than 5 systems, but of course that can differ quite a lot between SMEs. And even if we have a lot more, we tend to just start with one to see the effectiveness of our ISMS over time. Then lastly, we integrate our fail controls, but we design them as effective from the start. Because of course, there's no point in integrating failed controls because those controls are failing by nature. For us, automation is key. You have to comply with more controls using fewer people and less resources. And this is something that SMEs struggle with quite significantly. You don't have a lot of people at your disposal. You generally have less resources. So you use those people and resources to comply to as many controls as you can. On the next slide, there's a nice quote that I altered slightly from John Lambert to fit my agenda for tonight. And the quote goes, auditors think in lists, auditees think in graphs. As long as this is true, auditees win. So what we're saying here is an auditor thinks different than the company it is audited. So you need to adapt the way your ISMS works. That it first of all works for you, and second of all can then be understood by the auditor. The initial quote of John Lambert, he works for Microsoft, was actually attackers think in lists and defenders think in graphs, but I can't afford changing it slightly for tonight, would be nice. On the next slide is more of an overview before we get into an actual control of how we achieve this. The graph function is what we use to explain our controls to top management or leadership. These can be your directors, your C-level, whatever you might have. The ISMS is, of course, where we use our control framework and where we meet our objectives. And our auditors generally have their PBC list, which is the prepare by client list, which is always that nice Excel sheet that they send to you a week or two in advance with hundreds of questions. So combining these three elements, that's how we get certification in ISO 27001. And on the next slide, I'll go into a real and a practical example of how this works. So the graph that you see on your top right-hand corner is in essence that. It's one graph that meets multiple controls, which we'll get to later. What is important about this graph? First of all, the enabled users. That is the amount of licenses we have available at this stage. Second of all is your active users. That is simply your active users in a month. Your third point is your month-on-month returning users. Those are users who are active in that month and the previous month. And the fourth point is first-time users. Those are in essence your new users or your new employees that joined the organization. If we want to look at our leaver list, we then take the difference between active users and month-on-month returning users. Then you also have your leaver list. This graph is something we give to management. It's easy to understand and it drills down all the way. On the next slide is the drill down of the graph that you see now. So it feeds into your graph. So let's take the first point we can see here. We can see that we have active users 63.1%. What this means is we have more licenses available than actual users using the licenses. This is a great way to save money in the short and the long term. We can see our staff turnover for December was 0.7%, meaning that only 3 people left the organization. We can also see what our active users have been using mostly in the organization. This is a great way of looking at things like data loss prevention, or where is your data and where is it traveling to. Now, the drill down isn't super important. It's just to give you guys an idea that the entire chart that we present to management can also be drilled down in easily understandable language. Anyone that looks at this has no issue in understanding what they're seeing. So on the next slide, we'll actually look at how does the ISMS look. I think the key thing to show here is, first of all, if you look at our control objective, for this example, I chose control A.9.2 of ISO 27001. The reason why I chose this control is a huge amount of SMEs struggle with the new joiner and new leaver list. They simply can't get this right. And this is also a great example because if we look at this control structure, we also can see the NIST requirements that we meet and the relevant GDPR articles associated to these controls. And in essence, what we have is if we know these controls pass, we can also see everything else passed in this. So if we look at our NIST requirements, each of them are a hyperlink, and clicking on that hyperlink takes you to the control. What is great about this is we can share with our auditors directly, meaning whenever they need to access the information, which for us is generally end of the year, they can actually pull all the information, the relevant documents, graphs, data sources, passing, failing controls, and remedial actions to them in one central portal. This goes the exact same for management and the people doing the controls. So if we remember, we need a graph, an ISMS, and an auditor to get certification. And using this one view, we get all those people together. Then on the last slide, this is in Dutch, but please bear with me. I took a screenshot of the PBC list that our auditors sent us in 2020, where it essentially asks us for our new joiner and leaver lists and the procedures we follow accordingly. So once again, let's go back to the overall picture. We have our graphs, our ISMS, and our auditors. Combining all these three, SMEs gets ISO 27001 certifications with relative ease. Using those certifications, we also comply to multiple controls, via it be in the NIST framework or different legislative requirements. In our case, this was GDPR, and everything is done at once. So we go back to the initial key point that we said, we have to be able to achieve more controls with less people and less tools. And this is the Microsoft Office 365 way of doing this. That is actually the last slide on my side. So I'm wondering, while we are here, is there any questions thus far? No questions tonight. It's a pretty slow night. Then there's no. Oh, we have one Ferry Harris. Oh, Ferry.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for both presenters. Your explanation does make sense for both of you, but then what do you think hinders big companies to implement a similar approach as well? Because if this approach, quote unquote, simple enough, straightforward for SMEs, don't you think it should be also applicable for bigger companies?
So that's a good question. I have audited ISMSs of larger companies, so companies with more than 20,000 staff across the world, generally locations of 5 to 7 different countries, and they tend to struggle with a completely different set of rules than what SMEs struggle with. Your larger organizations tend to struggle with things like manager involvement, and how do you prove that? Because that becomes a lot more complex the bigger your business is. If you look at your bureaucracy, it is also quite massive for those organizations, so you have a lot of red tape to do. And also, of course, if you look at ISMS implementation and ISO, it's very much an organizational culture change. For some big organizations, they might be able to do it faster, but generally bigger organizations are also slower moving. If we take Microsoft as an example, there's a reason why Microsoft doesn't develop as much software anymore. They simply buy smaller companies that create the software. They're simply too big and slow moving to adapt to markets fast. So is it possible for big organizations to be compliant fast? Well, not as fast as an SME, no, but they can definitely do it in what I would say an acceptable time frame, which is less than 24 months. And if you have big leadership backup, so of the CEO and C-level executives, it is possible to do it in under 12 months. But it really is a different animal also. So there definitely are differences, but in essence, ISO is simple. It's not difficult. The business and the way the business processes is handled just becomes more complex.
Okay, clear.
I like to add to that the complexity from bigger companies also makes introduces the need of different way of controlling things. And of course, we had last weeks and last months we have seen quite some really awesome tools that have a lot of control information just from backdoors, from logs, and are interpreting that with artificial intelligence and self-learning algorithms. These tools we did look at in other square tables are just over the top, too expensive and too large for SMEs. So they have to adapt to other ways, and I think that the big companies have these tools, and it's also necessary to use them because over the organizational way they can't get the control feedback they need, which is in an SME. You just go on the work floor and say, hi, is everybody encrypting his hard disk? Yes, okay, let's pick out 3 of them from the 15 people available. Yeah, that's right. So it's quite simple. With larger companies, it's not possible. So there you see this development of tools that can help you with taking controls.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Then we also have a question from Frans Dondorp. Do you typically integrate incident registers in the ISMS administration as well, or is that usually in the SME market provided by a separate ticket handling system? Gilbert, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I take that one. Typically, you see that depending on, of course, the type of organization, you see a lot of integration. I mean, what is that different from especially if you have a software company and you have a SaaS product, what is that different from a normal support question incident, from a security incident? The availability of the product is not there. It's an availability issue, it's a security issue, it is also just a primary product issue. Of course, some issues are not really fitting in, but with a simple labeling you can get them out. And of course, if you're talking about fraud or really sensitive issues, there's always the way of just talking over, taking the telephone and talk to the security officer or management immediately, which is normally done. And these type of issues are staying out of normally the incident register. But I have the same experience also with larger organizations. Is that a good answer to your question, Frans?
Yes, it is. Thanks very much.
Okay.
I would also just maybe like to add a little bit to that, Frans. So in our case, if you looked at the Office 365 way of how we implemented an ISMS, our incident register is actually linked to the control, and our entire ticketing system is built around the ISMS. So whenever you create a ticket, the ticket is associated or not with the ISMS, and if it is to a certain section, in this case it was control A9.2, so user access management. So if a new user is created, that will be linked to that. And let's say, for instance, we have a lever, because that's an easy example, and it took us 4 weeks to remove access. Then that becomes a control failure, which we need to follow up as part of A9.2.
Hanita Ruigrok, maybe you want to put your question forward yourself? You can unmute your microphone. Okay, apparently problem. I will then put the question.
It
There's
went
Anita.
back on mute again.
Hello.
My question was, you've shown 2 examples of implementing ISMS.
Yes.
I was wondering, how is that adopted within the Dutch market? And what kind of other implementations do you see in the Dutch market for ISMS?
Yes, a good question. Thank you for that question, Anita. In the Dutch market, I see a lot of GRC tools, governance, risk and compliance tools, which are put forward, and companies try to sell that to also to small medium enterprises for managing ISMS. But compared to, for example, the Atlassian example and to the Office 365 example, they are quite expensive, even if you're talking only about 5,000 or maybe 8,000 or 10,000 a year. SME company want to keep that money into the pocket, and understandable. So they want to work with what they have, and then it's the art of being a SME security officer to adapt, and that's what Nico also said. I see a lot of adaptations, and to be honest, I'm mostly asked by new customers, because of my work with Jira and the Atlassian tools. Apparently, it's just going around. I never make any marketing, and people know to find me just because of that. I've even get requests from Spain and other parts of the world to help them, which I can't because it's too busy. But as Nico said, you have to adapt to the tools that are available, and there are many tools available that are having the same functionality. These type of boards, having wiki possibilities for making your documentation, linking. That's enough to build an easy ISMS. Do you agree, Nico?
Yes, I could maybe also give Anita a specific example there because it is public information, so I don't mind sharing it. If you take, for instance, big Dutch organizations like Rabobank, they're making use of GRC tools called Logic Gate. Now, what that tool essentially does is it's a SaaS out-of-the-box solution, so it runs from the cloud, and that integrates with various systems. Using the results of those systems, they then kind of assess adequacy of the control, yes or no. And due to the complexity of the organization, it's pretty easy for them to centrally pick up, is there any failures in the ISMS? So in our example, of course, we're talking about less than generally 250 people in the entire organization. So it's very easy to pick up control failures. But for big companies and big GRC tools is definitely the way to go. But I have also seen, which I'm not sure if it's public information, so I don't want to call out any companies, seen making use of similar way than I did of using SharePoint and getting SharePoint developing and essentially building their own GRC tool. But it really does depend. But GRC tools, especially with clients who are SOC compliant in the Netherlands, tend to all lean towards GRC tools. So I think that was a long-winded answer, but I hope you're happy with that, Anita.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Perfect. Any more questions? Tom Bakker?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you fine.
I was wondering, you said in the presentation, SMEs, you have limited resources. And I was wondering, in your experience, have you how internal audit is organized? It's a very important subject in the ISO. My experience is with limited resources, always a struggle.
Okay, I can take that one away. The smallest company I implemented ISO and certified was 3 persons large. You can imagine that it's very difficult. As a security officer, I do the auditing as well. And the days I spent yearly on keeping the ISMS running is about 5 days. And 1 day is for auditing.
Okay, thanks.
I see also a question from Michel Sinkeler. You want to put it forward yourself, Michel?
Yes, that's okay. So yeah, it's already in the chat box also, but you showed the Confluence with the ISMS framework. Is it something that's standard available in Confluence, or you have to do that yourself?
No, it's not standard available in Confluence, so you have to build it yourself. But then in Confluence you have export and import possibilities. So you can imagine that one of the things, if I have time, is building on a standard to export and import, so you have a quick start. I hope I have it available coming year.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you for your answer. Yeah.
Erik Kuipers, let's hear your question.
Yes, I see you have some tools to have an ISMS in it. You can implement a sort of ISMS in it, but the conditions to have an ISMS working, I have missed in your presentation. And I think a tool, and to say it in a very rough way, a tool with a fool is just a tool. Yeah, you have some conditions to have an ISMS working, and I stated some things in my comment in the chat, that the commitment of an management and PDCA cyclus, Plan Do Check Act, that's an a need to have an ISMS working. And actually a risk management view on the controls you implement. But I didn't see that in your presentation. How do you look at that for an ISMS framework to use?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for your question. It's a good point. One of the good things in working with small medium enterprises is that commitment of management is easier than in large companies. I mean, I work mostly with companies under 50 persons large. That means I'm the sparring partner of the director owner of the company mostly. So commitment is easy there, but indeed, if there is no commitment, I'm not even entering the organization as a part-time security officer, and it will not start at all. So the moment that you start as a security officer, you will see with an SME there is commitment there. But you have to talk their language. So that's what I try to show with the business canvas. And that's also where I link my risk method on business canvas, just to keep that coming and getting this commitment. The commitment is even going so good that I manage mostly within a year to make business value. As a security officer, I'm allied to marketing and sales and getting new customers inside because of the trust we can show them within a year. And of course, if you're making business value, then there's a lot of commitment also from management. Plan, do, check, act cyclus is you have to implement that, of course. Planning and doing, I do over these Kanban boards. I showed in Jira. That's the kernel, the heart of PDCA. The check you have to do, of course, it's internal audit. I showed the audit framework or some how it could look like that, and also Nico showing that. And act is, in my opinion, with small medium enterprises, is your management evaluation. And I make it such that there are really topics to discuss. So supplier evaluation is one of the topics, is standard on the agenda for management evaluation. But I also get the support group to have a report about trends and incidents, the themes that they are seeing, problems they have distilled from that. That's what we discuss, and we see also if that is getting in the way of strategic targets. Nico, do you have to add on that?
Yes, I think I briefly added something on this where we mentioned that your ISMS have to be part of your organizational strategy. We use our ISMS as an organizational strategy implementer. So before we even would dream to do anything like this, we want to create it part of the organizational strategy. So where does the organization want to go? Why do they want to be, in this case, ISO certified? Why do they want to be GDPR compliant? And then we build the ISMS of that. So it's not only the management involvement that we get from the start, but kind of the entire company. And that's, I agree with Gilbert, that's pretty easy to do in an SME. In a large organization with a few thousand employees, it would work vastly different. But if the CEO is a hand-on guy that everyone, or girl, that everyone knows, he walks around the office, because it's generally only one office in one single location, it is really actually not that difficult, and it's pretty easily achievable. At least in my experience, I've never had an issue with that. But you are still correct, management involvement is definitely the most important thing with your ISMS implementation.
Yes, and business value. You also mentioned, Nico, that every control should add value to the organization, should be practical, pragmatic, should be logic, should have adding value to what you are doing. So it's I always see it as the art to see how you can help them, and with these best practices from ISO to help to make a better system and a better way of working.
Do we have any more questions? I don't see anything else or any raised hands.
Jordi,
Thanks for the explanation.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, this is Jordi. I was wondering, Nico, you said indeed that choosing to become ISO certified or setting up an ISMS should be part of your company strategy. And again, following up or continuing on what Gilbert said, you have to talk the language of the management of the organization. I know this is not necessarily linked to setting up ISMS and tooling such as Atlassian, Jira, or Office 365, but I'm just curious, how do you guys deal with the knowledge gap? I mean, a manager of a small medium enterprise is usually, as you said, the CEO. He is the responsible for IT. He basically does almost everything. But still, you're the ones being consulted to implement the ISMS. How do you deal with the gap, the knowledge gap that exists, for instance, during risk assessments?
Sure, I think I'll take this one because I spoke briefly about this with the good, the bad, and the ugly truth of SMEs. In essence, for me, that's a pro and a con at the same time. So you have major contributions done by few people, sometimes one or two people. But at the same time, then, of course, you create a dependency on key people. For SMEs, that's kind of an inherent risk of doing business. So there's no real way around it. And that's also why some controls are being outsourced, is because organizations are scared they might be too dependent on one or two people, and then they outsource the function completely. Nowadays, I think the easiest example on this is probably if you use cloud infrastructure like AWS or Azure or Google. SMEs definitely don't want to manage their own physical access to data centers or anything like that. So they kind of outsource certain functions, even to the point where I've seen the majority of SMEs also outsource the development, maintaining, and implementation of their cloud source environments, because getting a full-time AWS architect or Azure architect or Google architect is simply too costly for the organization and creates a massive dependency on one person. But of course, if you have that person already, so you do have the skill in the organization, you can definitely make use of that. And that's essentially what we did with my Office 365 example. When we got to the organizations, they were already 100% integrated to the Office 365 SaaS solution and had developers and architects for that. So we made the best of the situation. But indeed, if one or two key people would resign, it's definitely a big loss for the organization. But inherent risk of doing business.
Yeah, I can add to that. My way of working with risk management and binding it to the business canvas means that you have more or less a high level type of risk management. Depending on the type of organization, of course, you have also, like in a software company, you have a lot of operational risk, but that's mostly handled by the operational group of people, and they're going into detail. That's not something like combating and protecting for malware. It's not something that is on a management level, unless it's, of course, getting a lot of resources are necessary or whatever. But then it's on a large scale there. I also see my risk matrix for small medium enterprises of the single point of knowledge as a risk coming for continuity of the information streams, and also for the processes in the company. And that's one of the things that we work on. And you know how to do it, and you can outsource, you can document, you can train others, you can share knowledge. But yes, there is always a single point of knowledge there, and otherwise you have to find each other on topics where there is a knowledge gap, and take a little bit more time to get really into it. Is that answering your question, Jordi?
Yeah, definitely. It basically it comes down to educating the people on the other side of the table. That's what you're both saying, actually. Yeah. So thank you very much. Yeah.
But also you have to educate yourself to step towards them. It's not only asking for the people on the other side of the table to come over to your topic, but also you have to find each other halfway.
Yeah.
Since we're almost reaching the end of tonight, is there any more questions?
If not, then we're going to end this session. I would say thank you very much to all the attendants. I really liked the discussion in the end. Happy that we had time for that. Happy there were a lot of questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, everyone, and please remember that session for next week starts at 6 and not at 7.
Thank you very much.